Hi everyone, welcome to the video. So what we're doing is I'm here with Jo McAndrews, and we're going to have a conversation because we hosted a really successful event a couple of weeks ago that covered various topics, including how to cope as a parent in the pandemic, how to support our children through this difficult time, and also sort of moving on to how to support children with feelings about the climate emergency. And I know a lot of people wanted to come to the event and weren't able to, so we're recording this video in order to allow anyone who missed it or anyone who just wants to refresh themselves to sort of have a taste of what was discussed in that event and get some advice from Jo and hear what she has to say. So thank you so much for doing this with us, Jo. Really appreciate it.
Complete pleasure.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah. Actually, do you know what? I've got a slightly hoarse voice because I was screaming at my radio in the car today. I completely had a sort of yelling fit in the car because I was listening to the radio and it was on today. They were talking about children's mental health in the pandemic, and yeah, just the way they're talking about it. I feel perpetually angry at the moment because what I see is a real neglect of awareness about children's mental health and the impact of everything on that. And actually, they were addressing that in Today this morning, so I was interested to hear that. But there was this moment, well, there were two moments that made me shout. One was they were interviewing a teenager who was self-harming because she'd been bullied at school and then she was isolated in lockdown. And their answer to that was that we need to get schools open because homes aren't safe. People aren't safe with their families, but they are safe at schools. When she had just said that it was school where she was bullied. And it's such a simplistic response. We just need to get schools open. I mean, yes, of course, but it's much more complex than that. And my concern is more about where does the support come from? We haven't got enough support for parents and for young people. And the second thing was in the same piece, a psychotherapist was describing a client of hers where there was a single mother with a 4-year-old daughter, and the mother was having to work from 9 till 6 every day. And the psychotherapist was describing how much the 4-year-old girl was struggling with that. And for me, that's the perfect example of why the government response to the pandemic around children and families is so utterly rubbish. Like, there should be a parental furlough scheme where anyone with that sole parenting responsibility automatically gets furloughed and gets paid to stay at home and look after their child. And obviously, and instead of saying anything about that, the interviewer said, "Oh yes, but children are so resilient, aren't they?" And just sort of completely got off the really isolated and vulnerable situation that this family were in, with the mother with not enough support, the child with not enough support. And the psychotherapist who's being interviewed went along with that and just said, well, yes. The thing is, children aren't naturally resilient. They're adaptable. Children are adaptable. They will, because they have to, they will adapt to extraordinary situations. But there's a cost to it. There's a cost to that. And it really makes me angry that people use the word resilient like that when it's just a way of saying, oh yeah, but children's needs don't really matter, do they? They'll be fine. Yeah. So anyway, so my voice is a little bit hoarse, but I just wanted to say that as a sort of, it felt like, because I knew I was talking to you today, and I thought, yeah, this is the soup we're in. It's not just that we're in this pandemic which is causing so much stress. We're in a system that doesn't even notice or care about that. And I think that's the important thing, is to take it off. As parents, we all feel so responsible and easily guilty for not doing well enough by our children. But actually, we need to look much wider at that, about what the wider community and the wider system is causing and creating.
That's sort of what that comment, that children are resilient, was kind of batting away, the societal responsibility to support parents and this kind of broader communal response that's needed.
Completely.
And I don't know if you saw, but the TUC did a survey, and apparently only 2 out of 5 parents, mostly mothers, who'd asked to be furloughed because of childcare had been allowed to.
Wow. Only 2 out of 5 who'd asked. See, what I know is that so many people haven't even asked because they don't even imagine that they could have that.
Yeah. So for the people who'd asked, that's only a tiny percentage of the people who would want to.
To be honest, that is disgusting, and I would say abusive. That there's a lot of government policies that are creating huge hardship and trauma for families and for children, and it's it's very easy to say, oh yes, well, in a pandemic everything's difficult for everybody, but it's not just about the pandemic, it's about who's prioritized in that. And knowing what I know about child development, I know that there's going to be lasting ramifications to this, which is why we're talking, isn't it, to think about how, as parents, what is it we need to do then to protect our children in that. So yeah, let's let's think about that.
Yeah, let's jump into that. So one of the questions that kind of came up a lot in the meeting that we had was this sort of idea of how not to lose your temper and how to stay calm. And in fact, when I contacted you, and so we were talking about the meeting, and you said to me, like, what do you want it to be about? And I was sort of like, how not to just like lose my temper all the time. And that was the thing that I was struggling with. So I think that's probably a starting point where a lot of people will be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's think about that. I mean, the first thing I would say is it's not possible to stop yourself losing your temper. Let's just accept that we are living in a bit of a nightmare, and we are going to lose it. And I'm saying that I don't mean to say that in a hopeless way. I mean to say it in a compassionate way. Let's just accept that we are stretched to breaking point, and that the cost of that, where that comes out, is that we, as parents, we are not resourced enough to be able to hold it together regularly. So having said that, there are things we can do about that. And that's what I'll talk about. But I don't want to make it sound easy, like, oh yeah, losing your temper, you don't want to do that. You just have to do this instead. It's like, no, in those moments, there is no choice. There's no choice about it. And if we think that, we should be able to do better, we're just going to give ourselves such a hard time and feel terrible, which is already, of course, what's happening. And then that adds to the stress. So having said that, should I say more about what's going on in that? Because I remember somebody in our meeting said, why do I keep losing my temper? Because I keep trying not to. What's going on? And how's that going to be impacting my child? So I'd like to say something about, I think it's so helpful, that model of the brain about how we regulate stress and how we don't regulate stress. So, and some people will have heard me talking about this before, but Daniel Siegel, who is a teacher on the biology, the neurobiology of stress and behaviour, and a theory called polyvagal theory, which explains how our bodies cope with stress, how we lose it, and how we help ourselves. So it's beautiful, beautiful information. So to put it sort of fairly simply, he talks about how you can imagine our hand being describing the brain, a model of the brain. And so our brain and nervous system is all connected. So this represents our spinal cord with our nervous system, and this is the brain that's in our head. And you can look up videos of him explaining this in more depth on YouTube. But just to put it simply for our purposes, I find this learning this has been life-changing for me, because it just helps me understand how it just makes sense. So we have our downstairs brain. So these are our brainstem and our limbic system, which you could call our reptile brain and our mammal brain. So the sort of earliest evolved brain. This part of our brain downstairs, which is in our head, it's like underneath and inside of the rest. This part of our brain is really focused, and it's and preoccupied with the need to feel safe and connected with others. So we are deeply social animals. We cannot function without being connected to other people. And for children, that's 100 times that. They are developing their brain in connection with their most important relationships. So their parents, their siblings, but particularly their key attachment figures. So this part of the brain is all about, I need to feel safe, and I need to feel that you love me, and I need to feel held, and I need warm, connected relationship, and I need to know that you understand me, that I make sense to you. And the upstairs part of our brain, I mean, this is actually, it helps me to think of this as toddlers have got this quite well developed, but they're still working on the rest. So if you imagine a quite young toddler, that's the sort of, and their needs and the way that they behave, it's like that's this part of their brain has developed. And then what happens after that is we develop the upstairs brain, or the cortex, and this is the bit that we'd recognise from pictures, that's got all the curly wiggly stuff on, and that's where everything else happens, all the super stuff. So all the thinking, learning, remembering, risk assessment, making decisions, social and emotional connection and skill, the ability to recognise our feelings and put words to them, the ability to describe what we are going through, and crucially, the ability to control our behaviour. The ability to, so in this conversation about why do we lose our temper, what happens is, this is our integrated brain. So we have so as adults we have all this. A toddler hasn't grown the upstairs brain yet very much. They're in the middle of, they're starting it. But as an adult we have this, hopefully enough of the time our brain is integrated and together. But what Daniel Siegel describes as, when our downstairs brain doesn't feel safe and doesn't feel enough support, and in a moment feels under threat, we flip our lid. So that our upstairs brain, which is helping us to cope with the life, we lose connection with it. And although it doesn't literally flip, it does literally get cut off. The blood supply, the oxygenated blood supply, and the energy that's keeping it going is literally cut off in service to our survival. So this is a survival, an evolved survival strategy, which is great for avoiding saber-toothed tigers when we first evolved it, but when we are in a pandemic lockdown where we're not getting enough support, because the way that we as adults keep that brain and keep that lid down is through having being around other people who are calm and friendly and help us feel like we're safe and that we matter. So when we as adults are under the stress of of not having those normal support systems, of having extra pressure of parenting so much more of the time, and on top of parenting, being expected to supervise our child's education. I mean, it's staggeringly impossible. Absolutely shocking that anybody would even think for a moment that we should be doing that. I mean, we'll come on to the education and schooling part of it, but just having your children at home 24 hours and nobody can play with their friends. So of course our lids are like this. Of course we're going to get that. And when that happens, when we feel overstressed and overwhelmed and we lose access to our choice, that's where we go into the downstairs brain being in charge, which is our fight and flight and freeze and faint reflex. So the first two of those are fight and flight. So the bit of us that is losing our temper is our fight reflex attacking. And in that moment, our poor animal brain, because this is an animal brain basically, is just recognizing that I am under threat. And who's the threat? And then it'll be our child who's needing something from us and who can't leave us alone, or who's doing behaviour that irritates us. All of our energy goes towards them, and we can end up shouting at them and losing our temper with them. And it's not surprising that happens. But it's painful, and painful for the child to be on the end of that, because in that moment, as a lid-flipped parent, I feel that my child is enormous, like an enormous monster enemy, actually they're really small and powerless, more powerless than I am. So it has a tricky impact on them. So there's two things there that then for me that come out of that. One is how do we get enough support that we can put our lid down again as much as possible? So I would call that resilience. How do we develop the resilience, the flexibility that when we do lose it, when we do flip, that we can then recover? So that's one thing which I'll come back to. And the other thing is, how do we repair it with our child? How do we minimize the damage on them? So back to the, is that okay for me to just say a bit more about those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just wondering actually, as you were talking as well, like I've worked with children who've experienced trauma, and often you really see it's like that toddler brain is still there even though they're 10 or 11.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, because this is kind of a sort of a national trauma, whether that can exacerbate that sort of inability to control that animal brain.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, many adults also have past trauma and are still operating. So in this model, I think of trauma as being where you basically are living in a state of having a flipped lid most of the time, or a lot of the time. When we have unresolved trauma, it's like, and if that trauma comes very early in our lives, like from not having our needs met when we're very small, then it's like we never even grew the connections here very well, which makes us very vulnerable and really, really vulnerable to stress and losing our temper. So it's, thank you, because it's not just the current situation, it's also our whole history that makes us more or less resilient in the face of this. Yeah. So back to those two things. For us as parents, how do we try to, increase our chance of keeping our lid on, or at least getting it back? How do we give ourselves better chance at calming down? Is we have to completely turn up our focus and prioritizing of self-care and social support. And of course that's, when we're isolated from our friends and colleagues, and when we are so much more busy, then of course that's easily going to drop off the list. But if we are serious about preventing trauma out of this, preventing more trauma for our children, we have to be pretty fierce about this, actually. And it is work. There's no soft option. It is a commitment to say, right, what's the most important thing here? And there's a whole, of course, there's saying that there's a huge load of inequality that's happening, where actually there are many, many families where even eating enough is not guaranteed. Where there's the loss of income, or the lack of income has meant that children are actually going hungry. And it sounds really, insensitive to say, no, we really have to look after ourselves. And I'm not talking about we need to spend every day with our feet up, with face packs on, pampering ourselves. It's not about that. It's about ferocious self-care, which is different for each of us. But the point is, I suppose, two things. One is, even in the face of it, how can we find opportunities to let our nervous system relax? So for some people that's going out for a walk and that is a fantastic thing. Exercise, air, sunlight, especially in the winter. How do we get out? Or how do we, what's the self-talk going on in our head? That's a huge part of the stress response. Do we spend all day going, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough? How can we start addressing that to find more compassion? And none of it is easy, especially if we don't have the habit of it. But we can point ourselves in that direction. And perhaps more importantly, we can really prioritise getting support from other people who can be there and support us and listen to us, so that we can, when we flip our lid, we can phone another adult and say, I am losing it, I am so angry, a bit like me in the car screaming. You know, it would be awful if I then saw my daughter and started screaming at her because of that. So I go, okay, I am furious. I need some support with that. I need some good company with that. And then I don't have to, I'm not just going to turn it all on my daughter when she says the wrong thing or slightly upsets me or something. So self-care, it has to include good supportive care. And I know that you're planning a listening partnership thing,
Yeah.
where you're getting parents together to form listening partnerships, and that is a fantastic, brilliant thing to do, because what we need is somebody who we know the point of them is that we can turn to them and say, I am really struggling. I don't know what to do. I've lost it 7 times today and I just want to give up. And we need the other person to say, yeah, I hear you, of course. We don't need advice. We don't need somebody to tell us, oh, you need to do this and it'll be fine. We need deep, empathic care. So that's why I'm sort of cautious about saying, well, what you need to do to stop losing your temper with your child is this, this, and this. Because of course there are things that will help, but we're still going to lose it, you know, because these are extraordinary circumstances. And then the other thing is about how do we minimise the damage with our child. So I'm hugely encouraged by the research on this thing called rupture and repair, that is showing that what builds children's resilience isn't that they have perfect parents who never lose their temper and are always really serene and friendly. It's that we can't give our children that perfect, you know, we shouldn't even be comparing ourselves with the perfect parent that we wish we were. It is going to break down that connection between us and our child that children need so desperately. It will regularly get disrupted. And what actually builds health and resilience is when the brokenness of that connection is repaired. So it's the repair that counts. So what's important isn't whether we lose our temper with our child, it's what we do when we calm down. And that we do have choice about. We do, because when our lid comes back down, so we lose our temper, we have a meltdown, we behave atrociously, then hopefully we'll do something. We'll get support, or we'll get some quiet and peace, and we'll find a way of calming down, or we'll have overnights to sleep or something. What's important then is that we come back to our child and say, I am so sorry. You didn't deserve that yesterday. You didn't deserve me shouting at you like that. It must have been really scary to see. You know, it's like, sometimes does it feel to you like I'm turning into some mad monster that's going to eat you up? And you know, we can empathise with them for what's happened and say, I'm so sorry, and I wish I could say to you that I won't do it again. But you know, sometimes my lid flips. I think that's a really useful image to talk to children about. Sometimes my lid flips and the bit of me that is in charge disappears, and I am like a, you know, and I just want you to know that that is never your fault. That's never because you deserve that. It's because I'm trying to cope in a tricky situation like you are. So that's how we protect our children, isn't by suddenly trying to sort ourselves out so we never lose our temper, but to help them understand what's going on and apologise and mend it again and empathise.
I guess in that way we're sort of teaching our children how to be resilient themselves as well, because if we're modelling
Yeah,
failing and repairing, we're sending them the message that it's okay when they mess up with their behaviour, their relationships with other people, because they can repair it.
yeah,
which
exactly.
I think is something really, really valuable, actually.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a bit of a comfort we can tell ourselves as well, that even in the moment that we've done an awful thing, we might actually on some level be helping them at some point in the future too, when we own it, take back responsibility for it, and show them in turn how they can do that too.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point that isn't modelled in our society enough, is the understanding that actually it is never a child's fault when their parent gets angry. It isn't. You know, even if they've done something that you've told them 10 times not to do, even if they haven't put their computer down when you've asked them to, whatever they're doing, if you get angry, it's your issue. You know, it's your thing. And I think that's a really important message to give to children, is that if I get angry, I'm not, in the moment I might blame you, but actually I know better than that. I'm in charge of my own feelings. We mustn't make children responsible for our feelings. I mean, we do, but it would be much better if we didn't, because that's just too much. The power imbalance there is just too awful, and children don't have. They're much more powerless than us, because it's the parents who create the rules and the environment that children are doing their best to thrive in. Yeah.
Yeah, and just on what you were saying about like self-care, and you know, just to that sort of acknowledgement of, well, as well, of how incredibly difficult it is to kind of give yourself that, like you say. And I think in some ways, just sort of as well acknowledging that this is a really hard situation, and it's hard to do. Doing the self-care is hard, and if you don't manage to sort of forgive yourself as well, because it isn't easy. And in some ways, that act of forgiveness can be self-care in itself.
Exactly, that's the point. It's not that we need to take an hour out to skip amongst buttercups. It's that self-forgiveness, that's self-care, self-compassion, and we don't need time for that. We need sort of, it's like an attitude that we need to keep coming back to, but we also need support for it. Something I've been thinking a lot about recently, and doing and talking to other people about, is using music a lot more than music is a fantastic way of regulating, especially now when we don't have other people doing that. I've been sort of making a playlist and encouraging other people to make a playlist of first aid music. When things are getting heated, put this music on. When there's lots of fidgeting or running around, put some really rhythmic and sort of, move to it, or just have it in the house. Sort of, there's a lot of research about music and how it plays a very strong part in regulating our mood. So we can make some conscious choices about that. And sometimes it's easy to reach over and just put a track on that you've already chosen. We don't have to do it all in silence. Sometimes music makes us lose our temper because it's the wrong. We also need to have calming music. So we need a playlist of music to calm everything down, music for when things are agitated and you just need to let off steam, music for just some enjoyment and pleasure, and use that. I think that's one tool I'm realising is actually, I hadn't realised before quite how powerful it is.
Yeah, and that kind of, I guess it taps into a sort of sense of connection with other people. It's kind of a way to feel connection with someone who isn't necessarily there, that kind of bodily rhythmic connection.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, moving on to sort of whole homeschooling dilemma, if that's what you could call it. I think a lot of parents are feeling very stressed out about trying to get their children to do this work, that the homeschooling is causing a lot of arguments in the house, but also kind of worry about their children losing out on this sort of period of learning and how that might affect them as well. So interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I have so much to say about that, so I'll try and work out how to summarise it. Firstly, looking at the bigger picture, I think the government's education policy is abusive. I can see that you're needed. This is a great example. Hello. Of how our attention is always split. Lovely to see you. Hi. We're talking about learning at home. Yeah. So the government education department are putting huge pressure on schools, trying to pretend that, trying to sort of say, right, this pandemic isn't going to affect us. We're going to make schools offer full-time curriculum, full-time lessons, and that we're going to start threatening punishments if you don't get 95% attendance. And schools are, teachers are under the most extraordinary pressure, and have been since the beginning of lockdown. Schools are still open to some children and not others, and they are expected to provide this whole online curriculum when they've never been trained in online learning. There are loads of people who know a lot about online learning and would never, ever even dream of putting through children, thinking that that's going to be any sort of effective way to learn. The school curriculum is not designed to be done at home on your own. Do you want to turn your camera off for a bit and deal with what you do, and I'll just talk to my camera. Yes. Oh, this is such a good example of the need to be flexible and how hard it is just to have thinking space. So, what was I saying? Yeah, that the school curriculum. I mean, I already have some strong reservations about it. To be honest, I don't think it's fit for purpose. But at least it's designed for a teacher who's been trained in delivering that curriculum in a classroom with other people. To expect to just put all that online and expect children to spend school days keeping up is utterly impossible, utterly ridiculous. And I think we need, as parents, we need to remember, and as teachers, we need to remember that nobody knows what we're doing. This is the first time we've experienced this need to be isolated from each other. And we need to acknowledge what an emergency that is. This is not how we should be living. And if we do have to live with this for a while, then we need to treat it like the emergency and not expect life to go on as normal. I am very, very concerned about the pressure that children are being put under. And I'm very concerned about the pressure that parents are under to keep on at their children to be learning in a way that is totally against their needs, against their nature, against their capacity. And what that means is that the level of pressure, I know so many parents who are battling with their children all day about, have you done your maths yet? Have you done this yet? Have you done that yet? And the child's going, I don't want to. And of course they don't want to, because it's mad. It is mad. And it's fantastic. There are some schools, and this is patchy, and they're not the majority as far as I can see. There are some schools who are really saying to parents, look, just do, it's there if the child wants to engage with it. And that's how we should be using it. Fantastic that there's so many resources that children can access to give them structure and input and ideas and learning. Great. If they're happy with that, I'm really glad it's there. But no child should be forced to try and engage their brain, because that's the other thing, is understanding how children learn. We can't learn under pressure. So we're just basically turning them into performing monkeys and saying, well, you just got to, get it handed in so the teacher can tick the box, and they can give that box to Ofsted and the government will say, great. So, and I saw a Facebook post recently from someone, I just felt so sad. A parent who, whose teacher, the child's teacher, was just doing her best. And the parent was in a dilemma. Do I force my child to do this work because I want to support the teacher? No, no. We need to not be forcing our children, and not be, what children need at the moment and what is most under threat is their mental health and well-being and their development. The whole narrative, the whole mainstream media, government narrative that I keep seeing is that children are going to really suffer for missing out on their education. No. Firstly, they're not missing out on an education. They're getting a different type of education, which is going to be very, very useful to them. Learning how to live in a different way, learning how to find meaning, learning different things like how to grow vegetables or how to, all sorts of things. Cook, many things that can be different. Children are never going to stop learning. But who thinks that the only thing that matters in education is this national curriculum? It's just completely misunderstanding how children learn and what the most important things are. So what I would say to people, and especially XR people who already know that the systems that we're in are what has led to and is leading to the climate crisis that we're in, is our schools, our education system is part of that system. And we need to be saying no. It needs to be, I would like education unions to be saying no to the government and protecting schools. And then they're trying, but they're not succeeding. Then I want schools to be saying, no, we are not going to traumatise the children in our care. You are wrong about this. We need to be focusing on mental health and resilience and emotional, social well-being. I would like teachers all to be, relieved of teaching duties and invited to, because there's so many good online resources children could be using, and teachers could be maintaining the relationships and connections with the children that they know, and that would be really supporting them. And instead, teachers are stressed beyond belief. So I want us all, and then so if unions aren't doing that, if schools aren't doing that, if teachers aren't doing that, then it needs to be parents who are saying, no, I'm not putting my child through this. I mean, I've always home educated my daughter, so I'm very, very confident that children learn with what's around them, and they grow and they develop, and they do that most successfully when they are feeling safe and happy and protected. And so if we want to help our children's educational chances, we need to be supporting their emotional and physical health. So it's not a choice between mental health or education. We focus on mental health, then when schools are open again, our children are going to be in a good position to go back and catch up. Have I been clear enough?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop myself from putting my own sense. I'm a primary school teacher, and I'm a member of the NEU. They're one of the biggest teaching unions, and I do think that a lot of the reason why the union, it just hasn't been made possible for the teaching unions, they've been so demonised.
Yes.
Press simply asking for the schools to be closed for safety. If they ask for that, I mean, the level of organisation that they would receive would just be sort of, but also as a teacher, that, like you say, like children's brains develop and grow. So if a child, can start learning something at this age and still be just as good at, a few years later than if they started learning, they'll just learn it quick. If they start learning something later, they'll just learn it quicker. They learn it earlier. It would take them longer to learn that thing. So just a sort of another word of reassurance.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah. A lot of work that's done at school is stuff that's just trying to teach children something earlier than they would learn it anyway. It's not. We don't need it. We don't need it. There was a report recently this week that said that counted up the cost to earnings of children through their education being disrupted, and that was given a fairly prominent place in the Guardian and an opinion piece about it. And I think that sort of narrative is utterly bankrupt and irresponsible. And even the government saying, well, after the pandemic, we're going to put all this money into providing extra tutors so children can catch up. It's like, are you joking? What about all the extra mental health support, counsellors, trauma therapists? That's what we're going to need, and actually, that's what we already need. The levels of mental illness in children is going up hugely, or the services that are left that haven't been decimated over the last 10 years that offers mental health support to children are massively oversubscribed at the moment. That's where our funding and our attention needs to go, because learning only
well, because if parents' mental health is suffering, that's going to affect their children.
Yes. So that's why I'd like to see a lot more support for parents. And given that I can't make that happen, what at least I want us to do together is look at each other and go, we're being totally abandoned by our supposed leaders. What are we going to sort out for ourselves? How are we going to keep each other going in this? How can we get involved in local neighbourhood schemes or in regular support calls or listening partnerships? Yeah.
But the difference, I think, even just being changing the way you feel about it. So instead of feeling like I'm failing, this homeschooling is really hard and it should be easy, like my children are missing out and it's my fault because I'm not teaching them properly. So just feeling like this is an awful situation, and it's not being dealt with in a way that supports me and supports my child, and that's neither of our faults. It's transformative just to kind of change your thinking.
Yes,
and already there's so much support there in thinking about it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So that totally changes it.
So another sort of whole area that came up a lot was this kind of like how to help manage our children's anxieties about the pandemic. and about the sort of, that this kind of very scary situation we find ourselves in, and answering their questions and helping them through what is a period of sort of collective trauma.
Yeah, I know, that's a really big one, isn't it? And really important. So the heart of that, I think, comes back to remembering, because as parents we don't always realise how important we are, how much we're like the buffer to the whole world for our children, whatever age they are. Actually, we're sort of mediating the world and providing a sort of cocoon of protection. And and I don't mean that we can protect them from everything, but what we can do is make sure that they're not alone with it. That's the heart of it. Is there's so much that we can't protect our children from, but what we need to protect them from is being alone with it. So the most important, the most important thing we can possibly do in terms of children's anxiety and their questions is to really listen to them and give them a warm, unconditional love and attention and empathy for what they're going through. What a very common thing is a child will say they're worried about something, and the parent will immediately think, oh, I've got to stop them worrying about that because I want to protect them. So we easily dismiss their feelings or say, oh, don't worry because this, or it won't happen, or you don't need to be worried about that, or we just want to make it better. Of course we do. That comes from such a good place. But the risk of that is leaving them on their own with it, because actually, I don't know, Miranda, do you think it might help to actually demonstrate, if you say something to me about, imagine you're a child asking a question, because I can talk about an empathic response, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's difficulty.
Well,
I'm putting myself on the spot a bit there, but
yeah, no, I mean, I can tell you something that my daughter said to me when she was going to sleep, and she's 5. She said, I'm scared that you're going to catch coronavirus and die, which is obviously a big topic. And, the natural instinct is to say, that's not going to happen, don't worry.
that's a superb example. Yeah, of course you want to say it's not going to happen, don't worry. And inside you're thinking, at least I hope it's not. I'm like, God, I'm scared of that too. Yeah. So a way to respond to that would be just to really, oh, darling, what a massive worry to have. Is that thought filling up your brain? Do you think about that a lot? And your child might say, yes, yes, I don't know what I'd do without you. And then you can say, oh, that is such a scary thought to have. That's such a scary thought, isn't it? Because you need me, and how terrifying to think of me dying. Now, some parents will go, oh my God, you're just encouraging that thought by saying that, but actually that thought or that feeling is already there. And what the child needs to know is that you get it and that you can bear it. So rather than going to reassurance, you might say, yeah, I understand. I understand because you're hearing a lot of stories about people dying. I know. Then you might move, so the first thing is just to, I'm with you, I hear you, you make sense, I get your fear, and I can share it, I can be with you in it. And then you might go on to, that's why I'm making sure to eat well and get exercise so that I stay well, and I'm doing all the things that I can do to stay well. And that's why we're not going to see these friends and those friends, is to, to make that much less likely. So I'm doing lots of things to stop it. And I know still we can so easily get scared, especially at night time. What is it that would help you feel safer? I want you not to die. Yeah, of course. Of course I'm going to try very hard not to die. So what could we do that would help you? Shall I sing you a song? Shall we snuggle down and have a story? What would help you? So you then move on to, how about so because what the child is also asking is not just, are you going to die or not, is they're saying, can you bear my feelings, and can you help me work out how to bear my feelings myself. And the way that the child is going to be able to regulate those feelings is to feel safe and loved. So then you might bring in extra things like, I don't know. I did a thing with my daughter when she was little where we would do is pretend tying a thread to her heart and then going like that, just miming it and tying it to my heart and saying, no matter how far apart we are, that thread just gets longer and longer and we're always connected. Like a little story, or making a friendship bracelet or a little stone to hold in a pocket. So finding tangible ways of helping your child feel that you're always there with them. So boosting their sense of connection and acknowledging that that's what they need. Yeah, you need me. You need me to feel safe because I'm like your big mummy bear, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really great. Really helpful, and kind of leads me on to something else that I wanted to ask, which actually wasn't something that came up in the meeting, but something that I've spoken about with friends, which is for children with babies and younger children, kind of especially, but everyone, but especially for children, for babies and younger children who's sort of every month is a formative stage of development, and this feeling that they're sort of missing out on on these kind of on being provided with the experiences to sort of best aid that development, and also just sort of feeling like they're missing out on the sort of joy that is that you would ideally want to be present in your child's life at that age.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's so worrying, and what a really frightening time to have a baby and to have a young child when we're so isolated and there's so little company and support. And yeah, I really feel for parents in that position. So just understanding child development. So say we're looking at babies and toddlers. There's a lot of myths around about the needs for little children to socialise. Actually, for those first 3 years, the key developmental relationships are with one or two parents. A child needs an attachment relationship with one parent, and two is a bonus. But mainly it's that one. And so the important thing there, the babies aren't going to be missing developmental milestones by not being able to mix with other babies. The vulnerability there is the stress that parents are under, because what a baby needs ideally is a parent who's able to be responsive to them and relaxed around them. And so if parents are under huge stress, then that is a worry, and that's why we need more support for parents. And in the absence of it from our social care system or our system, we need to be providing that to each other, to neighbours and friends. We need to be looking in, calling and contacting parents with babies extra. I think the thing about joy is also, I think it helps to understand what we mean by that, because there's a pressure. I mean, even in the best of times, there's always a pressure on parents of young children to be dancing around, being the entertainers. In fact, I heard someone, another time I screamed at the radio, I think, was some idiot government minister talking about, oh no, it wasn't, it was a stupid prime minister in his stupid letter to parents saying, jolly well done all of you. And he was talking about recognising that, talking about parents who might have a 5-year-old that they had to entertain. I thought, no, parents aren't entertainers. They're not entertaining their young children. They are caring for them, nourishing them. Entertainment is like the least of our problems. What parents are doing are just being solid rocks that their children, being the sunshine in their children's lives. So, and that happens, I suppose the important thing is that happens in really simple ways. We don't have to be, if we haven't got the capacity to be down on the floor playing all the time or even much of the time, or we don't want to dance around, or we're not getting to toddler dancing classes or music sessions together or whatever, actually what creates joy in babies is the very simple act of connection. So a baby who's feeding, breast or bottle, who's feeding but is close to their parent and looks in their parent's eyes and sees that parent there with them, and the baby smiles and then the parent smiles. That is the developmental joy need right there. It's joy in, oh, I feel relaxed and happy and there's my mum smiling at me. So what we need to worry about is if there's parents who can't even find it to give their babies that much attention. And there are many parents who are in that situation, who are under extreme stress, and who may be suffering from depression and mental health problems that mean that they find it difficult even to give that bit of simple attention. And yes, that will have an impact on their growing baby. It will have an impact on their developmental needs, and that's why we need good support services. But for parents who are thinking about this and thinking, what can I do? How do I entertain my child? It's about how do you support yourself and get enough support that you prioritise just being able to be there with them. So with older children, that does mean prioritising that over keeping up with school. And for younger children, it means prioritising that over, I don't know what, over other things. I wish that it was possible for work, for parents of young children who have jobs. I wish it was possible for work to be a lot more flexible, for them to have time off if they're looking after their children all the time. Yeah. I actually, Miranda, that makes me think, some of this is about accepting, just really accepting, this is shit. This is really shit. And grieving that rather than keep thinking, I've got to make this okay. I've got to find it. I've just got to call it together. Just recognizing this is rubbish. It's an emergency and we have to get through it the best we can. We have to survive this and know what the priorities are. And the priorities
and do you think,
yeah.
Yeah, and do you think, like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I keep saying the same thing. It's fine.
Yeah, at the beginning, I'm talking about like rupture and repair. And do you think does that work in a broader context? So if you do have a year where you're just depressed and miserable, and not yourself and not the person you want to be for your children, can you still repair that bigger rupture?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have to be conscious about it, like do it deliberately.
Yeah.
I don't think it just happens unless we bring in a bit of extra support or whatever. But yes, yeah, and actually that's a good point, is just recognizing, a bit like when you're ill, you need time to recover. When you're in a traumatic situation, you need time to recover. So I think we need to be planning for this. I'm going to need some time to recover from this when things start emerging. And that's an extra pressure for those of us who are awake to the climate emergency, is that we think, well, this is just part of that. We're not living with this idea that the only problem we're facing in this world is a pandemic, and as soon as that's over, we'll all be fine. We're having to face, well, what's going to be next? And that's very painful to live with. But we can create the conditions for recovery in that. We can still be living in that situation and creating the conditions for recovery of our purpose, our the sense of well-being, our ability to face it. We can recover that, yes. And it comes through community. It comes through warm, loving, respectful, empathic, supportive relationships. I think that's our biggest job, is how do we create those and build on them.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so that kind of leads on to that kind of leads on to quite big topic, which is talking to children about the climate emergency, and it's this sort of question of how we talk to children.
Yeah, massive topic. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think is important to say about it now?
We could do another video just about it.
Just about that. Yeah, maybe we should. I mean, I think it's worth saying something now rather than just dropping it, but maybe it needs more attention. I think the important thing to say is that the most important thing is listening to children, not talking to children. What do we hear about our children's worries or questions? Because it's not just us that is the source of their information. And I think if there's a child, say a 6-year-old child, who's skipping about not worrying about climate change, we don't need to feel a responsibility to sit them down and tell them that it's all a mess. Because if we as adults are engaged with the environment and with climate crisis, and we are dealing with that, the first priority is how do we navigate that ourselves? How do we find the support and resilience to find meaning or purpose in how we live, and that in doing that we're modelling that to our children. So I think often the focus of how do we talk to children about climate change is this idea that we need to sit down and have a talk with them, and I think that's not as important as many other things, which is about how do we listen to their anxiety, how do we answer their questions. An example which maybe is similar to your example, but a teacher told me that this is pre-pandemic, there was a big educational workshop, and the children were in groups doing activities, and an 8-year-old child said to the group, the teacher, the group leader, am I going to die? She just was really frightened. She said, am I going to die? And the workshop leader had no idea. Is this okay talking about this?
Yeah, carry on.
I'm mindful of not wanting to say scary things in the presence of children out of context. So in the story, the workshop leader had no idea how to respond and said something really inadequate, like, not imminently. And for me, I think, okay, let's all imagine our child says that to us and be prepared. What could we say? And what I wished had been said to that child is, yeah, that's a really big question, isn't it? I'm not surprised you're asking that question in the face of everything we're talking about. Or if it's our own child and you're wondering where that's come from, you might say, "Whew, that's scary that you're thinking that. Tell me what you've heard. Tell me what you've heard that makes you think that." And then you address that together. So, for example, my daughter she asked me that question, "Mum, are humans going to be extinct in my lifetime?" And she hadn't wanted to talk to me about climate change before. I was involved in XR and she was just like, "Don't talk to me about it." But then she was around the school strikes and she was hearing stuff, and particularly the placards of, that came out of that IPCC report, "We've got 10 years." That sometimes those placards about "we've got 10 years" made it sound like at the end of 10 years we'll all be dead. That's like we've got 10 years left to live. And she had sort of taken that on. And so sometimes it's a matter of, well, let's look at this, let's think about it. But it's also how we live with that ourselves. I mean, what I said to her was, "Wow, darling, that's a very big question you're living with. I'm sorry that you even have to think about that. I'm really sorry that you even have to have that in your mind." And to be really honest, I actually don't know, because there are some people who are saying that that's a possibility, and there are many people who are working very hard to turn things around. And what my, where I am is that I'm scared, but I'm also knowing that I want to work with other people to do what we can. And for sure, there are going to be very difficult times ahead. The future is very uncertain. It is uncertain. And what I know is that when we are not alone in that, we can face it. We can face anything. And, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you want to do? What do you need? And then I listen to her. So the whole question about telling the truth is a very tricky one, because the truth isn't, it sounds like the truth is some objective thing that we then have to communicate according to age. But the truth is not just facts, it's what we do with those facts. One person can say, what I know about climate change, these could read a set of facts and say, right, that there's no point. There's no point in even living. There's no point in doing anything. I might as well just fly everywhere because it's too late to do anything now. And another person might say, with the same facts, they might say, okay, in the face of that, I'm going to prioritise growing my own vegetables, learning about water conservation, and I'm going to prioritise strengthening my family's resilience, because that's the best way that they're going to have a chance of coping. What we need in these times is people who are creative thinkers, practically resourceful, and community minded. So how do we do that? How do we do that? And then that's a different story, but it's still the truth. So that's, I don't know. It feels like anything I say is inadequate in the face of this huge question, but I suppose what it boils down to is that we don't leave children alone with their questions or their fears or their anxieties, because that's what is traumatizing and that's what will increase their vulnerability. So they need us to be alongside them in it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so powerful, I think. Yeah, you said a lot with quite a small amount of time.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it's, like I was talking to you sort of after the meeting and saying, that kind of anecdote, what you'd said to your daughter, I actually reminded myself of that when I was, sort of earlier this week or last week, after having seen some quite scary headlines recently, about sort of things being worse than scientists had predicted. And I think it is just that sort of the idea that you can choose what you can't change the facts that you're presented with, but you can choose how you react to them. It takes away that sense of powerlessness in the face of this massive existential threat. And we're all part of making this future, all kind of tiny pieces of this future.
Yes.
And we're all part of it, so we're not helpless.
Yes. I mean, for us as adults we're having to take this information on as new, we grew up expecting everything to be fine, maybe. It's like maybe more shocking for us to have to rewrite our idea about what life's about. But your thing about saying we've got a choice is that's right, but there's also times when it feels like we don't have a choice. Like sometimes I feel like I cannot get out of this grief or this rage or this depression. I don't feel any choice in that. So I think in a way there's sometimes we're regularly going to face this feeling of powerlessness and hopelessness if we engage with the climate situation, the ecological collapse. But in that, then, I suppose the way I think of it is, what path am I dedicating myself to? So I am choosing a path of wise eldership, I'm choosing to go towards wisdom. So when I'm in a state of depression or grief or anxiety, whatever, there's times when I feel like I have no choice. But as soon as I feel that any choice, as those feelings pass, and I develop, I think, okay, I've been dabbling in self-compassion and mindfulness. Actually, it's the time for dabbling is over. I need to commit to it because I need every bit of strength I can get. and I need every bit of support I can get. So when I do have choices, I'm making choices to engage with other people who are on the same page. So, you know, being part of XR or being part of the Deep Adaptation Forum, you know, being part of that work, surrounding myself with people who are nourishing, that we can make those choices, which then support us to be able to be more choiceful generally. But I suppose I just want to make the point that because of the way our nervous systems work, regularly we feel in a place, we regularly can feel that we don't have a choice in this moment. So it's grabbing the moments where we find choice again to set up a supportive environment for ourselves.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having this conversation with me and creating, you know, this opportunity to sort of spread, you know, a wonderful, supportive ideas to more, you know, to a wider audience, and to support more parents. It's really, really appreciated. And
I really hope it's supportive. I just feel this. I think the quality we need is like a sort of ferocious compassion. You know, you know, love and rage. Like, this situation is a nightmare, and we're not being supported by our system. So what do we do with that? And the sort of foundation of it is huge compassion for ourselves and our children, and doing whatever we can to choose what is kind. You know, what's the kind thing? If my child is crying because they can't do maths, what's the kind thing to do? The kind thing is just to stop doing it and do something else, that, you know, to be with them or comfort them, and say to the teacher, sorry, we're not doing that. And yeah, I think that's one thing I said in the meeting that I haven't said today, is just wanting to really support parents, and knowing that many teachers will really respect this. If a parent says to the teacher, okay, so I'm prioritising my child's mental well-being, which I see being quite a threat right now, and they're just simply not going to be doing this. They're not going to be doing the homework, or they're not going to be doing lessons on Fridays or whatever. It's a time to take things into our own hands.
thank you. I hope people listening feel empowered to
I really hope so.
away, because, you know, it is so valuable, and gives you a sort of, I guess, it's a bit more of a sense of control over what's going on in your house, where you sort of tell you, like, you don't actually do this stuff.
No, it's a sort of love rebellion.
Thank
Thanks, Miranda.
you so much again.
Okay.